Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Unified Consciousness Project series. I am your host, Kim Lyday, and I'm so excited to introduce you all to a dear friend of mine today, Lisa Campion. Lisa Campion is the author of the #1 best-selling book, The Art of Psychic Reiki and Energy Healing for Empaths. Lisa is a psychic counselor and Reiki master teacher with over 25 years of experience and has been teaching Reiki for over 20 years. She has trained more than 1,000 people in Reiki and conducted more than 15,000 individual sessions, which is amazing. So Lisa is also the host of the radio show and podcast, The Miracle on Healing on Empower Radio. She specializes in training emerging psychics, empaths, and healers so that they can fully step into their gifts. Because right now the world needs all the healers that it can get. And Lisa, that could not be a truer statement in the world today. My goodness. So it's such
Yeah.
a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. I'm always so happy to see you and talk about all the amazing things that you're doing in the world too.
Yes. Yeah. So today it's a special treat because we are talking about the unification of humanity, which feels huge, right? Like, how do we undertake a project like this? And Lisa, what really drew me to your work and what you do is you tap into the emotions of people through your work with empaths. And it's really shown that that can be a key in understanding people and creating bridges and connections where we often feel disconnected. So I'd love to hear, in your world, as you work with people, how do you create those connections? How would you create unity consciousness on the planet today?
That's beautiful. Thank you for asking. So because my specialty is really working with empaths and sensitives, I feel like this is a time when empaths are on the rise. Like our more and more people are recognizing that they're empathic, that they're sensitive, that they have psychic ability. We're going through like a huge spiritual opening. So if you were a little sensitive 10 years ago, you're going to be this much more sensitive now as humanity wakes up and we enter this shift in human consciousness that we're all a part of. We're expanding our understanding and awareness of that kind of sensitivity that we have. And I think that as empaths, we really feel, so an empath feels, for in case people who are listening don't know what that means, we feel other people's feelings as if it's our feeling, right? So it's different than the psychological idea of sympathy, like where you see somebody who's suffering and you're like, oh, that's sad, and that's good. Like sympathy is awesome. And empath is more like we feel it, and empath feels it. Almost, it's like we feel like it's our feeling. So empaths are like the psychic sponges of the world, and we absorb the energy, emotions, and sometimes the thoughts of other people, and we experience them as if it's our own feeling. So you sit down next to somebody that has a headache and they're depressed, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, my head's killing me and I feel terrible, I'm so sad all of a sudden, I don't know why. Right? We have that kind of experience. And my theory on this really, Kim, is that if everyone expanded their empathy, their ability to feel what other people are feeling and put themselves in other people's shoes, we'd have total unity consciousness, because the very nature of being an empath is to automatically consider other people's feelings, to you know to be aware of how, like, empaths often end up vegetarians because they're like, oh, I feel sad for the animals, or I can feel the energy of the animal's sadness when I'm eating that animal. We find it very difficult to harm anyone. We become very nonviolent as empaths, because I know that if I hurt you, I'm going to hurt myself, and if I hurt myself, I'm going to hurt you. Like, we're all connected in this oneness, right? Which is what unity consciousness is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I love that that you're speaking about us really being able to get in tune with each other. And
Yeah.
I think it's important too to ask the question. I know that there's people listening who might not identify themselves as an empath. And and there's been, by some people, there's been this idea that an empath is like someone who's special and has psychic abilities, and there's people who are empaths and then there's people who are not.
Mm.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is that we all have this ability to be empathic and to tune into the emotions of others. So what would you say to the people who maybe don't identify as empaths? Can they still connect to this unity consciousness and be a part of creating this?
Absolutely. And I do think empaths are a very specific subset of humanity. They're like sort of like the highly sensitive person, you know, that people identify with. And even when we don't identify with that, chances are good you know somebody in your life. Maybe you have an empathic child or an empathic spouse or somebody in your sphere that is that way. That you know, if you do, let's start unity consciousness by being kind to the empaths in your life because they take a lot of guff. And you know, a lot of empaths are told they're too sensitive. Like all of us can report like growing up as kids and having adults say, why are you crying? Like, I'll give you something to cry about. You know, like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Like, that's something we've all heard. Or they can get a thicker skin, toughen up. Like, we've heard that. And if you're not an empathic person, maybe you can support the empaths in your life by allowing them to have their feelings, by telling them it's okay, especially children, you know? So I think all children are empaths and some more than others. And we kind of learn that it's okay to be that way, or we get it smacked out of us, like I was saying, or just pushed out of us. And that's a shame. Like we don't see little kids, you know, I mean, they're moody and they go through their moods, but we sort of have to force people to stop being empathic. You know what I mean? Like to function in school, you have to stop being empathic, or to fit in with your the broader society, you have to stop being empathic. To deal with playing video games or violence or watching movies or all the violence and horror and everything that kids are exposed to, right? That takes the empathy out of us. So what would it be like as a parent or you know, a person that knows empath to make space for that, right? And then I think the other thing we can do is practice empathy. So even if you're not an empath, you can still learn empathic behaviors, empathic mindsets. And there are a lot of trainings that teach empath, you know, skills to people that don't have them. So on what we have total empaths on one side. If you have somebody that literally has zero empathy, that person's called a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Like extreme narcissism, psychopaths, sociopaths, and some of them are made and some of them are born, and you know, that's really the extreme ends. But there, if you're kind of in the middle, you can still choose, right? You can still choose to think empathic thoughts, to, you know, to consider how what you're saying is so, and I think it's so challenging right now and so triggering right now in the world when on social media or wherever you are, where people have such polarized opinions, you know, and empathy, even if you're not an empath, empathy can really, like, I have two sons. Here's an example. I have two sons. One of my sons is a veteran, so he was in the Marines, very conservative, Republican, you know, totally one side of the view here. I have another son who's completely liberal, total Democrat, you know, really identified more with that side of the things. And what I find is I can understand as looking at each person's viewpoint why they think the way that they do. If I use my empathy, I can think, okay, my son was in the military. I understand. And if I don't understand, I'm like, can you explain to me why you believe that? Can you share with me the experiences that you've had that lead you to believe that, or to think that way, to see that when if I use my empathy to put myself in his shoes, right? Or at least open my mind to that possibility, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, I get it why you see that way. And the same thing with my other son. If I put myself in his shoes and see things from his point of view, I'm like, yes, I don't see the black and whiteness of the world as much. And I don't feel as like the need to sort of defend my position to the death, you know. And I think there's a lot of that. If we could see and listen and hear and empathize with each other's stories, I mean, don't you think, Kim, like we're more similar than different as
Oh yeah.
humans?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad too to see some of the polarity that's happening on social media.
Yeah.
And there's families that are kind of being pushed apart
Yep.
and torn apart by it, you know, like right now we're having the debate online about, you know, the vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and
Maskers and anti-maskers.
right, exactly, like get it, don't get it, and on each, no matter which side you if you want to use those terms, whichever side you're on, there's really valid feelings on both sides.
Right.
And using the example of your sons too, like what would you say, let me ask you this, as a mom and as an empath, what would you say to your two sons to bring them together, since they have these opposing views that can be very like polarizing?
Yes.
What could we do to get them in the same room and have a conversation that's open and loving and connected with each other?
Right. You know, I mean, they're adults, you know, so there's not much I can, like, I sort of can enforce, like, let's not talk about politics at the dinner table, you know, or if we are, let's agree to disagree, you know, let's listen to everybody's opinions and not make it, not make it a personal assault on the other person, a personal attack. And I have to tell you, I haven't had to do that. They've figured it out themselves, that they can stick to the topics they agree on or agree to disagree with respect to the other person and acknowledgement, you know. And you know, even though my liberal son doesn't believe in conflict, he's very kind of a conscientious objector. He said to my Marine, my veteran, thank you for serving. It's not what I chose to do, but I respect that you did that. That was badass. That was amazing that you did that, you know. And that acknowledgement like went a long way to, I think we all want to be acknowledged. We all want to be validated. Like, yeah, that's not his belief, but you know, that acknowledgement hit my veteran where he needed to hear it, you know, to be acknowledged and validated. So I haven't had to step in the middle too much, thankfully, but I think that's what we can do if we take it to sort of the theoretical. Can we empathize with the other person? Can we listen to their story? Well, why do you feel that way? Tell me, explain to me like your situation so I understand where you're coming from. And I think of myself often like, I studied anthropology some when I was in college, and like as an anthropologist, like I don't understand like this different, it's like a person from a different tribe, but I want to, you know, I want to understand that. I want to put myself in their shoes and look through their eyes and see, because I'm curious about people and I like people in general. And then when I do, I go, oh yeah, now I get it, why you feel that way, you know. And there's sort of like, we can expand our viewpoints using empathy, and using empathy gives us a connecting point with another person, human to human. Then we can have a conversation.
Yeah. What would you say, if there are people listening, and I do think that empathy is an innate quality. We all know how to tap into that.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we get in our own way, and our fears and our doubts about like, what's the other person gonna think, or I just can't, like the unwillingness to kind of see someone else's point of view. Are there Are there any tools or uh, practices or anything that you would recommend that could allow people to kind of take the walls down and help them connect if they want to do that, if they
Yeah.
maybe they want to repair a relationship with a family member or that they've been arguing with or something along those lines, like what can we do to actually create these connections with each other?
I think there's a couple things we can do. And one of them would be to be very mindful of our own energy in those situations. So if you know you're going into a dicey situation or it's going to be a potentially difficult conversation, that you ground yourself, that you are calm and centered, that you're not starting out triggered, that you have a good energetic boundary. So if you're super sensitive, the empaths, we call them psychic sponges. So we want to make sure we're in a bubble instead of in a sponge. We're not absorbing the strong energy of another person. So we start with that. Sort of like that's what I do before I start a session with somebody. You know, I want to get grounded, centered, bubbled up. And then the person that I'm talking to, whether it's in a healing session, therapy session, or talking about politics, I know I'm inside myself. So that's the first thing. And then I think it's like I learned how to de-escalate confrontive people, in the mental health training that I had. And for me, what works is if you don't stand in front of them, like if you're in the same room, don't stand in front of them, stand shoulder to shoulder. It's less confrontive, you know, and then standing in like you don't get it like and like do the face-to-face thing because that tends to like and especially really look in their eyes, that tends to like bring up aggression. But if you're shoulder to shoulder, and if it's somebody you can even lean on, like you touch them, kind of like touch their shoulder, shoulder to shoulder, that can be also sort of calming and grounding. And then I find most people will de-escalate out of anger if you validate their feelings. That's all they want. I can't believe this. I'm so upset. I'm so angry. Well, yeah, like I get it. Like having heard your story, like I totally get it why you're so angry. Of course you feel that way. I'd be angry too if I went through that. And all of a sudden they're calm. Like, and there's a tricky line there where we also want to have a boundary where we don't allow people to abuse us or there's a difference between anger and hostility, right? So anger is like, oh, I'm angry, and that's fine. Everyone has the right to be angry. Hostility is more when we direct it at a person with a violent way, kind of. Like I'm angry is fine, but I'm angry because you're a such and such isn't so fine. Do you know what I mean? So we also need to have a boundary where we don't allow people to abuse us, or I just don't allow people to speak to me that way. I'm happy to talk to you, but I just don't allow that kind of, nobody talks to me that way. And sometimes we have to throw that down. But what I find is when I hold a really strong energetic field, like I studied martial arts, and when I get my kind of like martial arts thing up, people don't do that. They just feel that you have a boundary. And it's hard for us sensitives and us empaths to understand this, but when you have a strong boundary, it creates respect in other people. Right? So like neutral, calm, boundaried seems to be the most diffusing energy.
Yeah.
Do you ever watch The Dog Whisperer? Still love that show. Do you ever
I
watch that one?
haven't, not
Yeah.
personally, no, but I've heard about it.
Yeah. So this is dog training show. I think it's a great show, and it's a really good way to. He knows a lot about energy, but he would go into this calm, assertive energy, as a dog trainer, and he would model it really good on the show. And when you hold that calm, assertive energy, people just settle down. Do you know what I mean? But I think it starts inside ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. As you're I want to see if I can kind of reflect this back to you. As it sounds like when you are thinking about that bubble, the energetic bubble that we have, it sounds like it's almost like a mental intention that we're setting for ourselves. Like like kind of claiming the feelings that we want to have as ours.
Yes.
Like I'm trying to articulate it in words. It's like energetically, I've set my intentions all the time, but being able to put it into words for maybe people who don't do that, all the time. I'm just trying to articulate it in a way that's easy to understand and duplicatable. So you tell me if I'm getting it right. It sounds like we kind of choose the feeling that we want to portray in our mind and focus on it, allow ourselves to feel it, and then let that feeling emanate, like
Sure.
from our bodies.
Absolutely. And that it can be a mental thing, but it can also be a felt sense. So to really center yourself is to like bring all the parts of yourself into yourself. So your thoughts are focused on you, your feelings are focused in you, and you're fully present and aware in your body, right? So if we start with those things, that's a centering technique. And then thinking about the bubble is just a way to imagine, pretend, or visualize our boundary. In this case, our energetic boundary, like our personal space, but also our mental boundary, our emotional boundary, and we have the right to have a boundary, in so many ways. We have the right, and boundary just means it's really just the ability to say no when you need to say no. That's what a boundary is. It's like no, having good boundaries is when it's okay to say yes and when it's okay to say no, and you're being honest about that and able to speak that. So we live in a world where we're not really allowed to have very good boundaries, a lot of us, right? Or we have super rigid boundaries, but you have the right to have a boundary for your body so that nobody can touch you without your permission. Nobody can take your stuff. Nobody can sleep in your bed without your permission. Nobody, we have sexual boundaries around that we're allowed to make our sexual choices or our gender presentation. We have boundaries around that. We have boundaries around our emotional stuff. We have the right to have our feelings, and to express those feelings as long as we're not hurting anybody else with them. We have the right to our mental space, to our thoughts, to our spiritual beliefs, and to our digital life in these days. Like you have a right to have a privacy in your digital life. Nobody should has the right to take your phone and take your password and look through your texts. That's a violation of your boundaries. Read your emails, like we have digital boundaries now, and so a lot of I think it's so funny in a way, but unity consciousness starts with having good boundaries.
Yeah.
Right. And then when we have good boundaries, we maintain our own boundaries, and we're respectful of other people's boundaries. That means, so boundaries go both ways. Not only do you have the right to all of that, but everyone else has the right to that. So you get yours and they get theirs too, right?
Yeah.
And then, so in a way, it's like, then we can connect in unity once we're all individual in our boundaries. Does that make sense, Kim?
Oh yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is partly be willing to be authentic and release some of the fear. I think fear has been a huge barrier for us in being able to connect, and releasing the fear of is it okay to be me? Is it okay to have my boundary? Is it okay to have my space and to express what my rights are as far as boundaries go? Right. And having that we can stand in our power with
right
that.
And like part of unity consciousness is that, like, I've got my rights and you've got your rights, and once that's both respected, we kind of come out of that polarity where we're fighting over who has the right to believe or do or say or whatever. Then we can come together and have a conversation because there's respect, right?
Yeah.
Mutual respect.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Very powerful.
And I think it's like we tend to be polarized, so that empaths have no boundaries and need to tighten up their boundaries, and the people that are a little more boundary need to become more empathic. So we often end up in a relationship with each other, you know, where we have it's sort of the classic polarization where you have empaths on one side and narcissists on the other side. And there's a lot of potential for healing in that relationship. So the empath needs to become more like the narcissist and have better boundaries. And the empath needs to open their heart a little and think more about how other people feel and become more empathic. If we met in the middle, we'd have really healthy connection and relationship. We'd come out of those polarized places and have more unity with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, as you were speaking specifically about the empath group, that it can be scary to reach out, especially if we want to be in relationship with someone that we perceive as narcissistic, or who maybe is narcissistic at that end of the spectrum. What can we do to be able to come toward that person in safety, like feeling safe, that it's okay to do that? And I think
all
you
about
have
trusting your boundaries. So as empaths and sensitives, our boundary is our own responsibility. We often expect other people to mind our boundaries for us, and that's where we get into trouble. So if you're fully in control of your boundaries and you're confident in your ability to set them, even with somebody that's going to push on you a little bit and give you some friction, then I stopped being afraid in the world when I started really owning my own boundaries. You know, I go out, I go anywhere, I deal with any types of people. I'm fully inside myself and fully claiming and owning my own boundaries and knowing that I can do it. So what's there to be afraid of? You know, like, it's like when I was young, I didn't want to be afraid to be in the world as a woman. So I learned martial arts. That's what prompted me to study martial arts, because I didn't want to be afraid. And once I learned, I stopped being afraid. Right?
Yeah.
So when we have our power, when we find our power internally, and it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen at times, they do, but I don't walk through the world afraid, even though I'm sensitive, because I've been learning my whole life even how to physically defend myself, and now energetically, mentally, and emotionally how to defend myself. That doesn't mean you attack first. It means when you walk strongly through the world, what I find is the stronger and more powerful and boundary I am, the less confrontation and conflict I ever come across.
Yeah. I think energetically, people sense that. It's like that you have this calming presence, and so there's it doesn't raise a red flag, so to speak, for the people around you. You know, they don't feel threatened by you.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yeah, and that's what I hope. And I feel like, you know, on a more metaphysical level, it's like the world is a reflection, the outer world is a reflection of our inner state of consciousness. You know, so when we have peace and harmony on our internal plane, we tend to attract peace and harmony in the external world. But if you're walking around with a big victim or fear, or please don't hurt me, or whatever, and that's broadcasting out of you, then, you know, if you have a big victim button inside of you, you're going to always find a victimizer who's happy to push that button for you.
Yeah. And I would love for you to chat a little bit, because I think your free gift really ties in to being able to set these boundaries and take care of yourself. So I'd love for you to chat about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I have a free gift. It's a 4-hour video series on how to manage your boundaries, how to manage your energy if you're sensitive, you're an empath. So we cover the ground clear and protect meditation that we talked a little bit about. How do we clear ourselves? How do we imagine that boundary is there? What do we do? How do we get rid of energy that we might have picked up from other people? And then we talk a lot about energy vampires, narcissistic people, how to set boundaries with them. And we just go into the details, the real specifics of how to do it. Yeah. And it's a really nice class, 4 hours. My gift to all the sensitives in the world. I want everybody who's empathic to have that information, so that you can feel good about yourself as an empath. Because I really think, the more we can lean into our empathic nature and live from that point, the more we can come into unity consciousness.
Absolutely. And it's so generous of you to, first of all, to have created that gift for everybody and to be willing to just release it in full generosity out into the world is so beautiful. And it's great to see people like you that are willing to be a part of this movement in the world, to create that together.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim. And thanks for doing this. Topic is so great. It's so timely right now. So thank you for bringing all of us together to talk about unity consciousness and what we need to do to get there and how we can choose to get there. It's such a good topic. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Lisa, it's been such a pleasure having you and being in your presence, being in your light that you are just shining into the world. And I want to thank all of the viewers as well for taking the time to be here and be in this energy, be in this space, and be willing to learn how we can create unity consciousness together through connection, love, and empowerment. So thank you all so much and enjoy the series as it goes forward. Thanks for watching today.